Now, to those of you who saw the title of the video and clicked on it thinking I was just gonna sit here bashing modern God of War, prepare to be disappointed. Because to answer the question that the video title asks right off the bat, the answer is no. Sorry to disappoint, I'm sure some people were expecting negativity and were excited for all that cynicism and stuff, but shan't. I figured I should get that out of the way right off the bat. The whole being wary thing is part of my branding when it comes to discussing games that haven't come out yet, but in this case, there's no doubt in my mind that the game's going to be at the very least, good. Matter of fact, I might even say that I'm feeling a bit of that good old-fashioned hype. Now, here's a sentence for you. I'm not really the hype type. I haven't really gotten hyped for a game probably since Grand Theft Auto 5 in 2013, but in hindsight, that game disappointed me. I was relatively excited for Super Smash Bros. On Wii U in 2014, I was looking forward to Star Fox Zero in 2016, but I haven't really been full-on hyped in a very long time. However, I would say in the coming little while, there are two games that I would actually describe myself as hyped for, the first being God of War Ragnarok, and the other being Resident Evil 4 Remake. So good job, games industry, you managed to tickle my taint for the first time in like 10 years. Maybe next time we can work on some of your other issues. But hype is a relative term. I was excited for God of War Ragnarok before I ever saw a single thing about it. I was excited for it before I'd even played the 2018 God of War all the way through and started calling it Dad of Boy for simplicity's sake. Having played Dad of Boy and ended up actually quite liking where they were taking these games, it only made me more excited. The God of War that I played in my teenage years is dead and gone, but I'm okay with that because I thought the series was getting relatively stale by the time Ascension came around. They needed a drastic upheaval if this series was ever going to survive, especially when you take into account how poorly Ascension sold. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who thought the series was getting stale. So they decided to shift gears, to the point that the new games are completely different to the old games, so it's not even really worth comparing them outside of discussing how one informs the other. If you don't like the way God of War has gone, then fair enough, to each their own. That said, what is there to say about God of War Ragnarok? Well, I guess the first thing to mention is that whatever happens, it's certainly going to be a big deal. Aside from being a game that's been in development for quite a few years, Ragnarok is one of those things that I wasn't really familiar with even just a few years ago, but the concept of Ragnarok has become almost ubiquitous with anything related to Norse mythology, to the point of almost becoming a cliché. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Ragnarok is essentially what amounts to Doomsday for the Nine Realms in Norse mythology, the day when the armies of the gods fight against the armies of demons and the armies of giants, which is prophesied to lead to the end of the gods and the world itself. This is not the first time that Kratos was the center of a mythological prophecy. The entire premise of the original 6 God of War games was the gods attempting to prevent their own demise first at the hands of Deimos and then at the hands of Kratos himself, but ultimately being the ones to hasten the process along. I guess the question is, will Ragnarok be a gradual process, or will it be a full-on battle in the third act? And if the latter, will Kratos side with any one particular faction? Will he and Atreus be their own faction against literally everyone? Or will their interpretation of Ragnarok be entirely its own thing? Sorry, I'm already tangenting. So if nothing else, the world will never be the same once this game is over, and I'm intrigued to see how they handle it. Normally, I don't engage in trailer culture whatsoever. I'm fairly good at removing myself from all levels of pre-release, to the point that I was able to experience Dad of Boy with only 2 spoilers, the mid-game plot twist that precedes the Helheim chapter, and the true identity of Atreus. 2 massive spoilers, both of which I will be mentioning later on, so now's your chance to back out if you don't know, but considering everything else that happens in this game, not bad considering I managed to avoid pretty well the entire rest of the game for a whole 2.5 years before I played it. But for the sake of this video, I've decided to go in and watch all currently available trailers for God of War Ragnarok, although I'm not reading any of the devlogs or written press releases because who the hell reads these days? What I've noticed is that even a few months out, the trailers reveal quite a lot. That may seem like a superfluous detail, but generally speaking, I find that you can tell the amount of faith a publisher has in their product can be measured by just how much they're willing to show, because if the game sucks, you don't want to give too much away. That's why, just to pick a few random examples, things like Sonic Colors Ultimate and the GTA Trilogy remaster had almost nothing shown before launch, and we all know how those went. So it's reassuring to know that they're not coy about the details, but I'm sure we'll see much more leading up to launch. Gameplay-wise, this game looks nothing short of sweet. I remember getting some pushback for saying I liked the gameplay of Dad of Boy, and to me it comes down to this. I could nitpick a lot of things about Dad of Boy until I turned blue in the face. But all of that must bow to whether or not I enjoyed the game. Any flaw that I could bring up can be countered by the fact that I enjoyed the game, because I can only discuss the game I played, and at the end of the day, I had fun. The culture of cinema sins isn't going to stop me from enjoying what I like through sheer brute force. If you didn't enjoy the gameplay in the previous game, this game probably isn't going to change that, but I like where they're going with this one. It seems they're making a concerted effort to make the combat quicker, heavier on the combos, and more fluid with the Blades of Chaos, sort of doubling as grappling hooks, and it looks friggin' awesome. It remains to be seen if we're only going to have the same 2 weapons as before, but something as significant as a new weapon or weapons is probably not something they'd introduce in a random trailer. Something tells me though, we might actually end up wielding Mjolnir, because in actual Norse mythology, lifting Mjolnir has nothing to do with being worthy and everything to do with raw strength. Something that Kratos has a lot of. The thought of that might just be the most badass thing ever. We haven't seen a ton of gameplay just yet, but like I said, they'll probably show more off closer to launch. It also looks like they're adding more modes of transportation. In particular, it looks like we're getting a dog sled, which sounds alright. Doesn't look like it's going to add much to gameplay, but it looks like it'll probably cut down on travel time, which is a plus, because anything that minimizes the time between the interesting parts of any game is a good thing in my eyes. Otherwise, yeah, I can't really say much for the gameplay. The story, on the other hand, there's a lot to unpack. The plot is seemingly going to at least partially revolve around our boys trying to stop Ragnarok, and that involves recruiting the help of the Norse God of War, Tyr. And dear Jesus Christ, superstar. If Kratos is already supposed to be either 6.5 feet tall or 7.5 feet tall, how tall is Tyr? He's gotta be well over 10 feet tall. As for Tyr, I'm interested in seeing where his story goes, what his involvement is going to be, how his personality is going to play off Kratos, what with him being a former god of war. Although I do have a slight fear that if we end up with another companion, that might be a little bit too much considering we already have Kratos, his walking money shot, and a severed head to bounce off of. Adding one more might be a little too much. We all know that even with Tyr's help, their attempts to stop Ragnarok are going to fail, because that's a massive Chekhov's gun, and you don't set something like that up without following through. Besides, the inability to prevent Ragnarok is very much in line with Norse mythology in general, because the thing about Norse mythology is it's very heavily prophecy-based. You see, the idea of the old Nordic tales is everyone's day of death is predetermined, even the gods, and there's nothing you can do to prevent it. Many of the gods are destined to die at Ragnarok, fighting their most bitter rival. For example, Odin is destined to die fighting Fenrir the Wolf. This guy, presumably. And despite knowing his destiny and having nothing he can do about it, he still tries to prevent his death, which is why he has an entire realm where he keeps the souls of noble warriors who have fallen in combat, aka Valhalla. He's building his armies so that on the day of doom he may be able to survive. That's also presumably why he's such a paranoid being in these games, because he lives in constant fear of the thing that's destined to spark Ragnarok, so tries to prevent it by any means necessary. But for all intents and purposes, it's hopeless. The thing is though, Kratos is not bound by the same shackles of fate because he's not a being of Norse mythology. He's Greek, and therefore Atreus, aka Loki, is half-Greek, meaning that Kratos and Loki to an extent can subvert these prophecies and become the wild card of the entire Norse Parthenon. That was already stated at the end of the last game when they mentioned that Fimbulwinter was not supposed to happen for some time, but the prophecies never accounted for someone like Kratos. This is interesting to me because it implies that all the gods who are destined to die fighting their most worthy adversaries might end up being subject to a complete reshuffle and could have their fates altered as a result. Perhaps meaning that some of the gods who were meant to survive could die and vice versa. Considering that this is going to be the last God of War game in Norse mythology, I think that a lot needs to happen before they can officially tie things up in a neat little bow. So I'm wondering if they're going to keep the cast of gods relatively small, or if we're going to be tripping over new Norse gods every 5 steps. Which ones are going to be our allies, which ones are going to be enemies, and which ones are going to die. People are speculating about whether or not Kratos will die, and this will be the end of God of War as we know it. But here's the thing. Have we forgotten that Kratos has already died like 7 times? In fact, he's already been to Helheim and back, so to say he's permanently going to die is a bit of a stretch, and if they do decide to kill him off permanently, I would call all sorts of bullshit. Unless it's a case where Kratos is fulfilled in life and is finally able to let himself die in peace, but we'll see about that. I do, however, think we're going to be visiting Helheim. I think, and this is a very bold prediction, in our first encounter with Thor, he's going to kill both Kratos and Atreus. That's my bold prediction for the shocking twist. But as usual, Kratos isn't going to go into the afterlife peacefully. He's going to claw his way out like he usually does. It's been a hot minute since he's died and come back, but in this case, he also has to rescue Atreus' soul, because I'd imagine that Atreus doesn't have the same inability to stay dead that his dad has. So Kratos is probably going to have to venture into the absolute heart of Helheim to rescue his son's soul, and I believe Zeus is going to be waiting for him there. But I think there's probably going to be more to it than just that. I think we're going to meet Hel, the goddess of the dead. And if we're going to Helheim, I'd imagine she is going to play a part in that. Perhaps she'll be the one to bring back certain people from Kratos' past to throw at him. In which case, please gods, let them bring back the boat captain just one more time. Although that's just assuming that Hel would be an enemy. She could very well be an enemy of Odin, who would end up being your ally. But I think it would be more fun for her to be an enemy. I'd imagine she wouldn't be too fond of Kratos considering how many times he's cheated death. Besides, this wouldn't even be the first time that he's invading her realm, and I think it would be interesting for the one person who's able to sick Kratos' old enemies on him to be the one to finally force Kratos to unleash the ghost of Sparta to save his own son. And that's the moment that spells doom for the rest of the Norse gods. As a matter of fact, I predict that the fight with Thor that will end with the death of Kratos and Atreus is probably going to be early into the game, probably the end of the first act. Because that would still be when Kratos is pulling his punches in order to not wake the beast within him that he spent so long trying to repress. So that by the time he has a rematch with Thor, the God Butcher is fully awakened. They kind of already teased that Kratos is trying to repress the monster within himself in the trailer.
Stop thinking like a father for a moment and start thinking like a general! No!
As for the other gods, I think Freya is going to die. I think she's too far gone for Kratos to be able to spare her. If Hel ends up being an enemy, she'll probably be holding Atreus' soul to ransom, only for Kratos to yell screw it and kill her, as well as the other people she revives to fight him. Thor is probably going to die in a rematch, probably as a result of Atreus, because that would be keeping in line with the usual mythological rivalry between Loki and Thor, but I think the one person that Kratos is going to spare is going to be Odin. You see, the last game's key theme to me was Kratos coming to terms with the monster he used to be, being able to open up without fear of history repeating itself, while also teaching Atreus the restraint and control that he never really had. But if I had to speculate, I don't actually think he's learned to control the monster within him. I think he only learned to suppress it. It's like keeping an animal in a cage. You're not actually controlling that animal, you're just locking it up so it can't hurt anyone. But once the animal's out of the cage, it's bad news. So I think that's what Kratos' arc is going to be. He's going to be pushed too far and the beast is going to be unleashed once more. He's going to lose control and hurt a lot of people, maybe even Atreus. I'd imagine that Atreus is either going to get hurt or scarred by his father to the point of maybe running away. And that's going to be the motivation for Kratos learning to be able to unleash the beast willingly, but also being able to put it back in its cage when he's done. As for Atreus, it appears that his whole arc is going to be a journey of self-discovery, finding out exactly what it means to be Loki. So who knows, maybe he'll shapeshift into a female horse and give birth. Which reminds me, there's been some moderate pushback for a couple of things with this game, for example Potbelly Thor. It's somewhat been lost to history thanks to Marvel, but Thor was never actually a jacked pretty boy in the original texts, so this is actually a lot more accurate than one would imagine. But if you want to talk about historical accuracy, what about the people complaining that they included a dark-skinned person in Norse mythology? Well, it's one or the other. So I mean, Thor being more historically accurate is something people complained about, but having an ethnically inaccurate person there is also something people complain about. My mentality is, who the Helheim cares? I say we let them tell whatever story it is they want to tell without getting wrapped up in what is historically accurate and what isn't historically accurate and which biases people are masking behind criticism. And here's another thing I want to address. What part Athena is going to play in this game? Because she's also a wild card that can alter fate as she exists outside of the Norse Parthenon. Will she end up being the true final boss? I think doing that would be a little bit too far into the realms of fanfiction, but it would be an interesting idea to have Athena play an elevated role in this game now that we know she's still around. And the possibility of what that role might be intrigues me. And I guess the final thing I'm wondering about is the meaning behind that mural that Kratos saw at the end of Dad of Boy. The one that shows Atreus coughing up snakes and Kratos dying of cringe. I said that I predict Kratos dying and coming back, but what could that mean? Could Loki become something greater? Something that Kratos can't control? Will he be forced to kill his own son, or will his son kill him and repeat the cycle? I have a feeling that whatever we have in store, it's going to be a real emotional gut punch. My favorite. Even still, I am excited to eventually play God of War Ragnarok. By which I mean I'm excited to play it in a few years, cause I don't want to play it unless it's on PS5, and the PS5 is still currently worth its own weight in gold, so I'm happy to wait. I was once asked how I can consider myself a true fan of these franchises if I'm okay with waiting so long to play them. Quite easily, as it turns out. I'm patient, and I like to experience things outside of the hype cycle, so I'm not bombarded with the things that come with the hype cycle. Plus, I'm also cheap and tend not to buy games at full price anymore. We all enjoy our things at our own pace, right? Although, if I happen to buy a PS5 by the time Ragnarok comes out, and Sony sends me a review code, I would be happy to cover Ragnarok on day one. Hint hint, Sony. No, I'm not a shill, why do you ask? Anyways, that's all I got, so why don't you share what you're most excited for with God of War Ragnarok in the comment section, and if you're not looking forward to it, let me know why. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you like the sound of my voice. Otherwise, I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Peace.